everyone? It's your boy Gsluke here for our weekly course breakdown, this time for the RBC Heritage and Harbour Town golf links. We're coming off Masters Week, which was epic, high energy. There was a lot of storylines, whether it was Tiger Woods making the cut, being able to see the Big Cat back in action, or of course Scottie Scheffler coming through, completely proving all the haters wrong and really asserting himself as the best player in golf right now. I was one of those people who wasn't completely sold on his game. I thought that maybe it was a little bit too early for him to be world number one, but after this week, I have no doubts about that. I mean, the around the green play was something I didn't really attribute to him. He was somebody who was a consistent gainer in that category, but he looked like Jordan Spieth or Seve out there, just an absolute wizard, was getting up and down from the toughest of positions, and with his explosive off the tee game and that approach play that can really pop from time to time, the ceiling is really non-existent for somebody like Scottie Scheffler. It's just going to continue to get better and better here on tour, and I would expect him to be a factor here for at least the next 10-20 years. He's going to be one of those type of players. But Masters aside, let's go ahead and focus on this week, which is a little bit of a cool down week. It's a much lower prestige event. You still have a relatively strong field though, and a golf course that isn't quite Augusta National, but it's unique in its own right. It's more of a precision type of golf course where you're going to see guys hitting fairways, maybe laying up off the tee a little bit more than most and trying to be really strategic about how they're playing. So definitely a change after Augusta National, that major championship type of event. And what we're going to do in this video specifically is make sure you know everything you need to for this week, whether it's a course breakdown, talking about the field, the format for this week. We're going to go hole by hole with Harbour Town, giving you an idea of exactly what these players will be facing, some key stats for analysis, comp courses and whatnot. So whether you're a DFS player, a seasoned golf bettor, a casual golf fan, or just getting into the sport, you're new to it, whatnot, you're going to know everything you need to for this week. So looking forward to getting into it. And like I said, this is much more of a precision type of golf course where you're looking for those accurate players into greens rather than that explosive off the tee game. So a lot of edge to be had here, particularly with some of the casuals that will be sticking around after the Masters, in a week that we can definitely look to take advantage of. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it and what we can expect from this week's menu. Before we hop into it, first off, make sure you smash the like button. It gets it out there to more people, and of course I appreciate the support on the channel, but also down in the comments, let me know what driver I should buy. I broke mine today, ended up kind of raging, breaking it in half. So be it. We needed a new driver anyways. Let me know what you're playing in, what you would recommend that I go ahead and buy. I'm a relatively high speed player, hitting right around 305 yards with my carry. So keep that in mind with what you're recommending. But let's go ahead and hop into the field where it's going to be a unique field. It's only 132 players. So rather than 140 or 144 like most events, sometimes we get 156 from time to time, a little bit smaller than usual. So that's something that a lot of people look over with a week like the RBC Heritage. It's not an invitational type field, but kind of in between an invitational and what we're used to seeing week to week. In terms of some of the notables, it is a relatively strong field, a lot stronger than what we're used to seeing at this event. Back in 2020, when it was one of the first events back from the pandemic, it was an extremely strong field. But this week, we have a similar strength. We have guys like JT, Cam Smith, Dustin Johnson in the field. Of course, all guys coming off their Masters weekend. Pretty solid weeks at that. We have guys like Colin Morikawa, who played really well on Sunday, going to be extremely popular this week. Patrick Cantlay, who's going a little bit under the radar. Guys like Shane Lowry, Corey Connors, Daniel Berger, Matt Fitzpatrick, Sungjae Im, just a ton of good names. And that's not even naming all of them. You have guys like Jordan Spieth, Joaquin Niemann, also Russell Henley, Webb Simpson, who's a former winner here, Billy Horschel, Terrell Hatton. I can't name them all, but this is a really solid field. So it's something right after the Masters where we usually get a relatively weak field, but that's not the case this time around. Whether it's the urgency with the FedEx Cup points, maybe it's the emergence of some of these new players that is putting pressure on these top end guys to actually get these FedEx Cup points. I mean, guys like a Sam Burns, Taylor Gooch, even a Masters champion this week, right? Guys that are breaking out here and really asserting themselves. If anybody's going to chase down Scottie Scheffler this year, they're going to have to win 4 or 5 events to take over that number 1 spot. It's not like last year where the number 1 spot was changing from week to week. So there's a new sense of urgency in the field, and you see that with the strength this week. So I love the competitive fire that we're seeing from these guys. And of course, the guys over there in Hilton Head are going to love what they see as well. In terms of the cut line, it's a top 65 in ties. So what we're used to seeing even with the 132 player field, and the cut line here is usually pretty low. We've seen it be -2 before. It was -2 last year. It was -4 when Webb Simpson ended up winning. even par the year before that, even par the year before that, and -1 all the way back there 5 years ago. So in general, I would put the range in anywhere from the -2 to maybe the +2 range. We haven't seen many over par cut lines here for quite some time, so I'd probably put it closer to the -2 to even range. So in terms of the champions, you usually see some relatively good scoring. It's a little bit of a wide range because last year you had Stuart Sink win at 19 under. He did win by 4 strokes though, but since then won at -22. That was in 2020. One thing I'll note with that is that it was in June rather than here in April, which makes a huge difference with the course conditions. CT Pan won the year before that at -12, which is a little bit more typical for this golf course. Kodaira won the year before that at -12. Wesley Bryan won at 13 under, and Brendan Grace won at 9 under the year before Wesley Bryan won. So you can see a range from -9 to -22. Now that we're back in April, the week after the Masters, which is where this golf tournament was typically played on the schedule, that's when we saw it at -9, -13, -12 for those champions. I would expect something similar this week. So it's going to be not an easy golf course, but it's also not going to be an extremely difficult golf course. If we're comparing it to the PGA Tour average, right around average with its difficulty. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right into what makes this golf course special and the types of players that I'm going to have my eyes on. All right, and now hopping into the specifics. Harbour Town Golf Links in Hilton Head, South Carolina. This is a Pete Dye and a Jack Nicklaus design. Two designers and architects that are known for being devilish, that have that type of reputation for putting up a very difficult set of conditions, and that is certainly the case with Harbour Town. It's just a par 71, your usual par 71 setup with 3 par 5s, your usual 4 par 3s, and 11 par 4s. The scorecard yardage this year, a lot longer than in years past. It was 7,121 yards in years past, but this year the GSCAA gave us 7,191 yards, so a whole 70 yards further, playing closer to 7,200 yards than the 7,000 yards that we've seen over the years. We've seen this golf course shortened in years like 2019, 2018, yet still play difficult. This year, it looks like they're trying to beef it up. They've added a little bit of distance to some of these par 3s and try and give it a little bit more teeth. So that's a difference that we have here in 2022 than what we've seen in years past. And if we take a look at some of the conditions given out by the GSCAA, they've given us quite a bit this week. Usually the people that are putting out this type of data, it's usually rushed. You can tell they don't put much time into it. Whatever intern they gave this responsibility to for the RBC Heritage, please, thank you. Continue doing this type of work because they gave us quite a few little nuggets here. So first off, the golf course has been overseeded. They made that abundantly clear in the data there. It was Bermuda grass when the tournament was held in June of 2020. They made sure to make that extremely clear. And they made sure to tell us that the overseed is by far the dominant grass type. They made that as clear as humanly possible to us, as they did a few weeks ago as well over there at the Valspar Championship. So similar conditions there. And they also gave us a huge report on the weather. They said that December temperatures were above average, but there were a ton of frost in January, February, and March. So as a result, the overseed is on the golf course, and rainfall had been below average until recently, where it has been extremely wet. As a result, a lot of the grass, including the rough, is longer than usual here at this golf course, and you also have a little bit less rollout. So they've given us quite a bit of data there, of course, with some of the rainfall of late. Also, with the fact that this is a completely overseeded golf course. The reason for that is with those frosts that they had in January, February, and March, a lot of the Bermuda grass died off. It has to be in extremely hot conditions. And even down South Florida this year with some of the frost that we have, a lot of the Bermuda grass died off. I could just tell you that from experience with playing golf on a lot of these golf courses. So up there at Hilton Head, where of course it gets a lot cooler than it will in South Florida, that is even more so the case. So when we talk about the greens, we'll do that right now. They're relatively small greens. In fact, I'd say really small greens, right around 3,800 square foot on average per green. The green speeds are relatively slow. They run them right around 11.5 or 12 by the end of the week, and a lot of that is due to the wind. Like I said before, this is a coastal track, and from time to time you'll get those 20 to 30 mile an hour wind gusts. And because a lot of the greens are exposed here, they're not raised, but they are raised, but they're not raised all that much. It can cause havoc from time to time, so they will run them a little bit slower. And like I said before, the huge difference this year than in years past is it's almost a pure POA tribulus overseed. So you still have that Bermuda grass base layer, but from the information that we've gotten from the GSCAA, it is almost completely dormant. So it's going to be that POA tribulus that we want to look at there. And in general here, you hit about 4.4% less greens than the PGA Tour average. So with that size, you still see quite a few greens hit, which is surprising, right? The average size of greens is right around 5,500 square foot per green, so you would expect that to be even a little bit lower, but that just shows you how receptive that they are. Because it is a coastal track, they get quite a bit of rain there. They've gotten quite a bit of rain of late, like I just told you from that report. I would expect them to be extremely receptive this time around as well. In terms of the fairways, they are slightly narrower than tour average. So last week at the Masters, we did have relatively large fairways, but this time they're going to be relatively narrow, and they also have heavily forested tree lines. So not like at the Masters where from time to time it'll just be a few trees. There are some heavily forested areas at Augusta National, but pretty much every single fairway at this golf course is going to have a heavy tree line. A tree line so heavy that when you get into them, a lot of times you have to re-tee. You can't even try to pitch out. It's one of those situations where driving accuracy is certainly the driving factor here over driving distance, because you have to set up angles into greens. It's only a 7,200 yard golf course. Even if it plays closer to the full scorecard yardage of 7,191 yards, this isn't going to be a golf course that eliminates anyone in terms of their driving distance. I mean, look at some of the winners here: Webb Simpson, Satoshi Kodaira, Wesley Ryan, Brandon Grace, all guys that are relatively short when it comes to their distance, but also all relatively good with their accuracy off the tee. So that is something that we're keeping in mind here, a lot due to those tree-lined fairways, but also because this is a Pete Dye golf course. One thing we know about Pete Dye is you have to be heavily strategic off the tee. You have to take on risk off the tee and set up easier shots into these greens. So the guys that can really place their ball off the tee, that are more plotters than bombers, are going to be the advantageous type of skill set for this week. In terms of the grass in the fairways, it is a Bermuda overseeded with ryegrass. So also what we saw there at the Valspar Championship. In its length, it is 3/4 of an inch long. So that's with the rough and the fairways. The fairways obviously cut a lot shorter than that, but the rough here is a little bit sticky. That's what you'll get with a ryegrass. So even though we've had some dry conditions, even though the overseed is the dominant surface here, ryegrass isn't as easy to hit out of as some of the other surfaces that we have. In terms of elevation change, this is a flat golf course. It's a coastal golf course, so you're not going to see any north to south elevation. And like I said before with the weather, it's always something to keep an eye on. This is a coastal track. You could get really windy conditions from time to time. And when that happens, the winning score is going to be closer to single digits under par than it is 20 under par. So definitely something to consider getting closer to Wednesday or even Thursday AM. Alright guys, on the screen you can see the Pro Visualizer tool, what we use to break down these golf courses hole by hole. And what I really want to highlight here is the strategy off the tee. So first off, in hole number 1, it's as straightforward as a hole as you're going to get because it doesn't dogleg. Most of the holes here at Harbour Town will dogleg either from right to left or left to right, but this is one of the few exceptions. You can see that there are quite a few trees in play, particularly the more aggressive you are off the tee. This is a hole where most players are going to take driving iron out, just get it out there to that 140, 150 yard range, hit a pitching wedge, maybe a 9-iron into the screen if it's a little bit windy, and get out with a par. It's as much of the handshake as you're going to get here at Harbour Town Golf Links, and for a Pete Dye design, it is a very simple hole. You're not going to find that very often. Hole number 2 is a par 5, right around 500 yards. It's reachable for every single player in the field. The unfortunate part is that this tree-lined fairway on the left comes into play, right? The more aggressive that you are, the more and more that you have to take it on, and misses into this tree-lined fairway on the left are almost certainly a par at best, if not a bogey. So driving accuracy here is the name of the game. In fact, you'll see quite a few players go out and just hit 3-wood or even driving iron off the tee and still be able to reach here in 2. Because it's only 500 yards, if you hit a 3-wood, you're going to have right around a 4, maybe a 3-iron into this green, which for some of those longer players is going to be their strategy. Now, if you're a shorter hitter, you still want to reach here in 2. You're likely going to have to hit that driver off the tee. And like I said, that's why we're looking for plotters. Those guys that are accurate off the tee so they can avoid some of that trouble on the left and take advantage of these easy holes. Hole number 3 is a relatively long par 4, and I say long because 468 yards for this course is relatively long. It's a tree-lined fairway. It goes to the left, so this is where we start to see some of those dog legs. And here, the more aggressive you are towards the left to stay away from the fairway bunker to the right, the harder shot that you have into the screen. Also, the more it brings this tree-lined fairway into play. So you can start to see some of the Pete Dye effects here where the more accurate, the more aggressive you are off the tee, the easier your second shot is. Ideally looking to get a fairway over in the fairway over on the right with your drive and have a relatively easy shot into that green. For your next hole here, hole number 4, it's a long par 3. This is one of the holes that was lengthened here for 2022. It's playing closer to 200 yards than it is 180. You have the water the whole way down the left, which of course can cause issues for these players. In general, though, the water here, not going to play as much as other courses, right? You're going to have water hazards on almost every single hole, but at the same time, On this hole, a few other holes towards the middle of the golf course at 18 are the only real holes where you're going to have penalty shots. So there is quite a bit of water out there, but not all of it's actually in play, which we'll talk about. And this is a hole where it's not really in play either. It's par 5, 547 yards. Your drive, you're not really worrying about the water. You'd really have to miss a long way left to get into it. You have the fairway bunkers to grab your shots, like whole 30, 40 yards worth of room over there on the left. Even for your second shot, you'd really have to shank it to get in the water. So a lot of it's more cosmetic than anything. It's a relatively easy hole here, the 547 yard par 5. And of course, because there's only 3 on the golf course, you have to be able to take advantage of them. That's for sure, to get to that 15 to 20 under par score that can win this from year to year. Hole number 6 is a dogleg to the right. So we've seen dogleg to the left at this point. Now you're getting doglegs to the right. The more aggressive you are out to the left, the easier shot that you have into this green. Very similar circumstance to what we're seeing on most of these holes. Hole number 7 is another par 3. It's nearly 200 yards. Another hole where the water is more cosmetic than anything because you need at least a 30, 40 yard miss to get to it. So like I said before, it's not going to cause problems for these tour players, but this isn't an easy hole. You can see there's quite a bit of elevation change from this bunker up until the green here, and it's also one of the more undulated greens on this golf course. Hole number 8 is a relatively long par 4, also a dogleg to the left. This is one of the more difficult holes on this golf course, not only due to its length, but also the fact that you do have water in play down the left. Now, when you're hitting a 180, 200 yard approach shot, those 20, 30 yard misses are a little bit more realistic. So a lot of the water on the holes previous here weren't in play, but for hole number 8, it is in play, and one of the holes that you're just hoping to make par on. Hole number 9 is a drivable par 4, but unfortunately is protected by a bunker on the front, so only drivable in the sense that you can get it down there to the fairway bunker. Most people are going to lay up off the tee, hit an iron off, and a wedge into here, and try and get a birdie before you make the turn. Now for the back 9, which is a little bit more difficult than the front. You had the 2 par 5s on the front. You also had the quote-unquote drivable 9th hole right there. Hole number 10 has water on the left, which makes the tee shot a little bit difficult, but you have a ton of room to the right. You're going to see a ton of people just bail out to the right. These are a relatively easy shot into the green. So much like hole number 1, you also get a handshake on the back 9. So whether you're starting on 1 or number 10, your golfer should get off to a pretty decent start. Hole number 11 isn't quite the hole number 11 from the Augusta, where it was by far the hardest hole on the golf course. It still is a little bit tricky because the fairway is really tight. You have a lot of claustrophobia with these trees over here to the left and the tree line to the right here. So you certainly have to be accurate off the tee, but it's only 437 yards. So the longest players on tour, the guys that are getting it out there 310, 320 with the driver, are just going to lay up with a 3-wood, right? Get it out there respectively in the fairway and be aggressive with their approach shot. Hole number 12 is another par 4. You get a lot of par 4s on the back 9, of course, with the 2 par 5s being on the front. It's 432 yards. It's a dogleg to the right. Much like the other doglegs here, the more aggressive you are towards the dogleg, going at the side where you're trying to hit at, the easier shot into the green. If you bail out to the left, it does bring this bunker to the left in play, particularly for some of those pin locations to the back left. And the further right you are, the less that bunker comes into play. And right, the less this bunker even comes into play, right? Because if you're hitting to back left pin locations from this right side, you can give yourself almost a clear alleyway. So that's the type of strategy that is involved on every single shot here. Really the genius of a Pete Dye design. Hole number 13 is another short hole, but it's pretty interesting like hole number 9 because it's not drivable, right? You have all this junk over here to the left in terms of trees, so you have to bail out over here to the right. Usually guys are just hitting 4-iron off the tee, and then they're going to have a pitching wedge or maybe even less into the screen. If you're going to be very aggressive here, it's probably not going to work out all too well, right? Because you're going to miss to the left very often. If you miss to the right, you also have more trees over there. You're probably just pitching out and then hoping to make par at that point. So the prudent play there, of course, is to lay up, and that's where you're going to see pretty much every single person do. Hole number 14 is a water-filled par 3. You can see the water on the right. And on Sunday, the pin location is going to be hugging that right side as much as humanly possible. So this is a relatively dramatic hole. You're going to see a lot of swings here. A hole that you're just trying to make par on. Anytime you have that 200-yard par 3, really a par hole at best. Hole 15 is the last par 5. It's the longest of the par 5s as well. So unlike the par 5s on the front 9, it's not nearly as gettable in 2. In fact, you're not going to see many people go for it in 2 at all because the tree line really protects it. A lot of these trees make it nearly impossible to actually hit over them into the screen. You know, with a 3-wood, it's much harder to elevate it than it is with an iron. So pretty much everyone's going to be laying up. They're going to be setting up a wedge into the screen. So it is a birdie hole, but not nearly the opportunity of the par 5s on the front. Hole 16 is a dogleg to the left, relatively short par 4, but missing this fairway bunker to the left, which also has these little steps in them, little natural areas that gobble up golf balls. Could be a relatively difficult hole. So definitely have to be accurate here, as for pretty much every hole here at Harbour Town. Hole 17 is the last par 3. It's also the longest at 212 yards. The water isn't really in play here. You know, much like some of the other water hazards, they're much too far offline to really cause any type of trouble. But this area over to the right, which is also a miss that'll be common, is really difficult to get up and down from. You're dealing with a huge slope from the green down to this chipping area down to the right. So a really difficult hole down the stretch that usually does make a difference with the winner. And then finally, hole number 18, the most famous hole at Harbour Town. You have the lighthouse back here in the left. You know, you see all the pictures from in this course breakdown video. You saw it on the picture earlier on. Just a beautiful sight. The largest fairway in golf, though. It's nearly 110 yards wide, pretty much impossible to miss. It's all about your second shot. And because it's the only hole that's coastal, where you're going to get plenty of those trade winds, some of those swirling winds coming off the ocean as well, it's the only hole where you can really see some bad shots, where you're going to get shots that end up in the marsh over here, and coming down the stretch, it could cause a little bit of havoc. So it's always definitely an interesting hole to watch as a spectator, and of course has that view in the background, which you can't beat. All right, and now that we've seen the golf course, let's go ahead and talk about my key stats for analysis that I'll be using in my modeling for this week, and the players that I expect to really perform well at Harbour Town golf links. So first off, the number one key stat I'm looking at is going to be shots gained approach, which if you've been watching these course breakdowns, if you've been a part of the channel for quite some time, you know it's my number one key stat pretty much every single week, but especially so at Harbour Town. Like I said, there's a huge de-emphasis on off the tee play this week. It's mostly about being precise, that it is really getting it out there with your distance. So in turn, you're really looking at approach play being the differentiating factor. You have relatively small greens here. The scoring is good, right? You're going to get to 15 to 20 under par winner from time to time. So as a result, giving yourself as many birdie looks as possible is typically what leads you to winning this event. Of course, putting is important. We're going to talk about that here in a second, but the real differentiator is that approach play. Off the tee, you're also going to see plenty of players hitting irons. You've seen Will Zalatoris do it. He did that at Sedgefield Country Club, a very similar track to what we have here this week. We're going to talk about that with the comp courses actually, but hitting irons off the tee, you know, having that approach play is going to help you off there, but also into these greens. So in general, the iron play is going to be the number one thing I'm looking at, which shouldn't be a surprise at all. Number two is going to be shots gained putting. So I told you we'd mention it. But when you get yourself in position, even just as important as putting yourself in position to begin with, is going to be taking advantage of those. Because the winning score here is relatively low, scoring conditions are much better than what we see at major championships, you're going to need guys to cash in. So rather than just trying to get the guys that put themselves in position, 15 to 16 times every round and are still missing 8 to 9 of those putts, why not take the guy that's going to maybe put himself in position a little bit less, closer to 13, 14 times, but cash in at a much higher rate. At this golf course specifically, that has been what has worked out. So, over the years, maybe outside of a Stewart Cink, a lot of these winners have been solid putters. I mean, Webb Simpson, at that point of his career when he won in 2020, was one of the best putters on the PGA Tour. CT Pan, also a pretty solid putter. Wesley Bryan, a solid putter. And way back in the day, even Brendan Grace was a better putter than what we're used to seeing today. So not everyone has been a putting maestro that has played well at Harbour Town, but it certainly helps. And also with these small greens, you're also going to have guys that are putting specialists making them from all over the place, right? If you even just get yourself on these greens, you have a chance to make your putt, and only 3,800 square foot, at max, you're maybe going to have a 50, 60 foot putt. So putting could be a differentiating factor as well. And per the correlation statistics, I do a lot of this on Data Golf, take a look at what they're doing with their skill set fits. Their number one key stat this week is shots gained putting. So I'm not confident enough to do that, right? Shots gained putting is usually a little bit volatile, much more of a ball striking analyst when it comes to my type of stuff, but the models that I'm running, but I can't ignore that, right? It's been important. You've seen a correlation with success over the years. So certainly something I'm looking at right there. And lastly, driving accuracy, which shouldn't be a surprise at all. I've mentioned its importance multiple times throughout the video. Making sure that you can place the ball off the tee is 10 times more important than actually getting it out there. In fact, it is probably the only thing that's important this week, because the average driving distance at this golf course is 11 yards less than the PGA Tour average, which is telling you that these guys are clubbing down a lot more often than they're hitting the big stick, and just really trying to get it to the right part of the fairway than just trying to get it in the short gas in general. So it is something that I'm taking a look at. It's not something that's going to be my number one key factor though, because you don't necessarily have to be accurate off the tee. If you're one of those bombers, like a Will Zalatoris that I mentioned before, he hit almost every single fairway at Sedgefield. That was the main reason I didn't want to play him, and he proved me wrong because he took the smart approach. So some of these longer players, like a Jordan Spieth, that might be extremely inaccurate. As long as he's hitting driving iron off the tee, he's going to be hitting some of the most fairways in the field, and with that driving iron, he's capable of hitting it 280, maybe even 290 yards. So driving accuracy is not going to be the only thing I'm looking at this week. I just want to make sure that I'm giving a boost to the players that are good in that category, right? Like a Kevin Kisner, some of these guys that are hitting 70% plus of their fairways, that's going to be a huge skill set because they can still hit that big stick on these tight holes. Whereas guys like a Jordan Spieth, Will Zalatoris, that might not be very accurate. I know what Will's not playing this week, but they would have to lay up off the tee, and they can't be as aggressive. So there is an advantage to having that driving accuracy, but it isn't the end all be all. Some of the other key stats I including in my modeling, I'm not going to go into huge detail on these ones, would be shots gained around the green. You've also seen quite a bit of correlation with shots gained around the green and finishing position here over the years. Also taking a look at the 150 to 200 yard proximity bucket when it comes to approach play. You get quite a few more shots from that range than you do at most golf courses. With the shots gained putting, I'm also taking a look at POA Trivialist overseed numbers. So we saw that over there at the Valspar Championship. And over the last 2 to 3 months on tour, because of some of the weird weather conditions that we've had here in the USA, we've seen quite a few courses overseeded with this POA Trivialist. And lastly, we have par 4 scoring. With the extra par 4 on the docket, we have 11 here at Harbour Town. Of course, going to have a slightly higher emphasis than it would in most of our models. And now our comp courses. Number 1 is going to be Sedgefield Country Club. I told you we'd talk about it. That is the home of the Wyndham Championship. In terms of both a visual comp and a skill set comp, this is pretty much the perfect fit. They're almost carbon copies of each other. Short golf courses with heavily tree-lined fairways where it's all about being precise off the tee, setting up solid approach play, and making your fair share of putts. That's why we've seen guys like Webb Simpson win at both events, a few other players that have had plenty of crossover between these venues. So by far my favorite comp for this week. In fact, with my weighting, I am using 4 comps for this week. It's over 40% of my comp weight. So most of my analysis, a lot of the numbers that I'm drawing for my analysis this week are going to be coming from Sedgefield because it is just such a good comparison. At number 2, we have Colonial Country Club, which is the home of the Charles Schwab Challenge. Now, this is at a different part of the country. It is a Texas golf course, but just like Sedgefield, it features a very similar skill set that is optimal. You're looking for guys that are more plotters off the tee, that are really good with the approach play, and maybe even a little bit more so than this golf course. You have to be a good putter. That golf course features some of the most undulated, some of the most difficult greens that you're going to see on the PGA Tour. So that's why it's a little bit less of a fit than Sedgefield. Sedgefield is also a relatively easy golf course on the greens. It doesn't have a ton of undulation. They run them at right around 11.5 to 12s, but love both of them as comps. And lastly, Waialae Country Club, which is at the Sony Open. That's in Hawaii, so also not very close in terms of proximity, but it's got relatively narrow fairways. It's also got tree-lined fairways, dog legs from left to right, from right to left, even more so than a Colonial Country Club, which is why I also like it as a comp, right? You're going to have to be accurate off the tee. You're going to have to be able to shape it from left to right, also from right to left. And putting also is a key differentiator at that venue. So really love all those comps there, and are definitely venues that I'll be using in my analysis. That is all I've got for the course breakdown video. Before you go on and get out of here, go ahead and let me know down in the comments what you think the winning score is going to be this week. I'm personally going to take 15 under par. Just with the overall play getting better and better on the PGA Tour, we're seeing better scoring year in and year out. The wind doesn't look all that bad at this point in terms of what we're going to see over there at Hilton Head. I'm going to take 15 under par, but I would love to hear from you guys, so make sure to go ahead and comment that down below what you think the winning score is going to be. I also wanted to touch on the content schedule for this week. We will have DFS content for the RBC Heritage, so look forward to that. We'll have our core picks dropping tonight. We'll have fades and sleepers value picks dropping sometime tomorrow. Our weekly DFS live stream, prize picks content to come, showdown content. We'll have you covered from all angles. So if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, first off, I highly recommend you go ahead and do so. That way you don't miss any of that content to come. But I'd also appreciate it. It'll help us with growing out the channel, and we're quickly growing here. We went from right around 1,000 subscribers about a month and a half ago to right around 1,200, and the closer and sooner that we can get to 2,000, the better. So I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all of the support. Again, smash the like button if you haven't already. And until next time, best of luck with all of your bets, your DFS lineups this week, or just have fun watching the event in general. And I'll see you guys next time.